Hey there hunters, and welcome back to another Let's Talk About video where I discuss and review some of the games I've been playing. Today we're going to take a look at Wayfinder from Airship Syndicate. Some of you may have heard about this game and the rocky launch and disaster that eventually became of this former MMO. But after the server failures and the publisher Digital Extremes pulled out, the developers of Wayfinder had a novel idea. Rather than let the game just die and shut it down, they instead decided to redevelop the game post-launch and then convert it to a single-player experience with some drop-in co-op multiplayer for, peer-to-peer style gameplay. And I thought this was an excellent alternative to just the all-too-familiar story of live service games being shut down months or a year after launch, and then all that development and road mapping just goes out the window. So when I heard that Wayfinder was being redesigned, I decided I'd give it a shot. I tried during the early access period and I just couldn't play it like most people, but now there's no servers to hold you back and it should be smooth sailing. So today we're here to discuss Wayfinder as a game in its current re-release state as a single player title which just launched here on June 11th. So let's go ahead and take a look at the general graphics, performance, and controls, which are some of the minor things in my eye. So I do want to start with the same thing that I have to say to everybody whenever there's any remotely cartoonish looking game that comes out these days. No, this isn't Fortnite. It doesn't play like Fortnite. It doesn't even look like Fortnite. It doesn't feel like Fortnite. I don't see the comparison. Okay, visually I kind of do, but I don't think it's worth making that connection. Wayfinder's art style is not particularly new or innovative, sure, but I think Airship Syndicate did a great job on the landscapes and environmental detail with this style. Some of the open world areas look gorgeous, and you could definitely tell in the newer zones, there's literally a night and day difference between the two. They look great. I really like the presentation. And that's all I really want to say on the actual visuals. It's not Fortnite, and I like it. Now, performance-wise, I was playing this mostly on my laptop running an 11th Gen i7 and a mobile 3070 GPU. It's good, it's not top of the line, but it's good. And it performed fine, steady 120 frames most of the time. I did have a few sections with high particle effects that would hiccup the frames from time to time. It would hold for a second and then continue on. But in my 33-ish hours of playing, it was probably only a few dozen times where it happened. So maybe you're gonna get a hiccup here and there once an hour or so. And it just stutters for a second and then it goes back to normal. It's not often, but it does happen and it is noticeable, so you do have to kind of mention that. And I've had a few crash to desktops even, but I've narrowed it down to just being audio driver issues and the game not liking me listening to YouTube videos in the background while playing the game, and it just keeps crashing. Sometimes I like to listen to podcasts and grind, but oh well. Basically, that's it for all the performance hiccups and stuff that I've seen. I didn't really encounter any significant bugs or anything like that, other than I got stuck a few times here and there while trying to travel to areas I really shouldn't have been going. But Wayfinder does do a good job on auto teleporting you back to a nearby fast travel point, and there's an unstuck button too, so that's not really an issue. And the controls, pretty standard, plays well on a controller, did that, plays well on a keyboard and mouse, that's what I predominantly used. It's clearly designed to be a console MMO given the skill and consumable layout and how it just perfectly meshes for a controller. But yeah, solid performance, don't really have anything negative to say. Has a little bit of issues here and there, but it didn't bother me that much. Now let's move on to some real meat and potatoes, which are characters, weapons, and gameplay and all that stuff. So Wayfinder has 7 characters to choose from. You get 4 to start, but you have to unlock the rest through in-game activities. I found them all without looking them up, where to find them and stuff, just a few hours gameplay and there. So it's not really restrictive at all. Each character has a unique passive, dodge, and archetype mechanics for their passive abilities, as well as they have 4 active abilities. Kind of reminds me of classes in Destiny or basically any hero shooter ever made. Not super original, but the cool thing here is that you get a lot of freedom to how you want to build your character because you can use any of the weapons in the game with any of the characters in the game with absolutely no downsides. Now there are only 4 different weapon classes, at least that's what I've seen throughout the game, being sword and board, colossus weapons like two-handers, dual daggers, and guns. Each of the weapon types has about 7 to 10 unique weapons that have same or similar movesets, but with different weapon active abilities. So as you're progressing through the game, you'll find tons of random weapons, and of course they're going to be higher levels as you're continuing to progress, so it does kind of incentivize you to use the best weapon and play with different weapons and find out what you like. You can craft weapons if you want, but I always just found that, whatever I wanted, I would just find and pick up, so it wasn't a big deal to me. I never really crafted anything. I just used whatever I had available. Now, of course, I'm going to be using guns. I've tried to play a few melee weapons, and I do like the daggers, and I think those are kind of fun, but for the most part, I stuck with the guns. And the gameplay with the guns is fine. Usually it's neglected when it's not a primary focus of the game, but I could say that, it plays just fine. It's gun, dodge, shoot, don't get hit, it's like anything else. Now, I want to briefly go over the rest of the gearing because it's a lot of the same thing, which is kind of a theme here in Wayfinder. So your total customization options for your character is pretty vast. Like, you have your weapons, which they all have their own stats. You have accessories, which they all have their own stats. Echoes, which are like gem slots for your equipment and character, which add to your stats. Armor pieces, which add to your stats. Affinities, which increase your stats. And talent trees, which add to your stats and sometimes give passives to do something else. But basically, there's a ton of items in the game, but they all do the exact same thing except boss echoes. And that is, they adjust your stats. And that's one of the biggest gripes I have with Wayfinder. Everything is just numbers going up. So for the most part, the gameplay experience between the first few hours of the game and like 30 hours later is exactly the same. There's not a ton to shuffle things up besides picking a different character or a different weapon. So it does get repetitive, and chasing numerical increases is only so fun for so long in my opinion. So if you like the core gameplay loop of Wayfinder, then great, you're in. But if you start out playing the game and feel like you're kind of wanting more, then you're pretty much always going to have that feeling, which is kind of where I was. It's not that the gameplay loop is bad, it's just it doesn't really change, and that can attribute to player burnout and loss of player retention, and I get it. Speaking of though, the general gameplay was like an MMO like originally, with towns and maps and dungeons, but to me it feels more like it's modeled after like Destiny, kind of like a pseudo MMO, where you're predominantly in the town and then you launch all your dungeons and bosses from warps in the town after you've gotten there like once in the open world map. I actually really like the open maps. There's like a lot to explore and things to discover and events and little things and hiding and stuff like that, but for the most part, you only go out there once to collect fast travel points, then you're just warping between NPCs and quest progression, so you're just fast traveling constantly, and it kind of takes away from that whole MMO experience. So you really just kind of do that once. Like, they even give you a mount to go and travel, but I mean, yeah, I use it, it's cool, I like the mounts, but you're not using them very often when you just can fast travel all over the place. I kind of wish that was dialed back and the zones were bigger to actually make you like, travel and explore. Which again is a shame because you end up spending most of your time in the dungeons and those are very repetitive and get old pretty quick. Like, the dungeons have the same layouts, the same couple puzzles that are barely puzzles to be honest, same enemy layouts, same spawn patterns. There's just not a lot of variety in the dungeon layouts, and you have to do them constantly for materials and quest progression, so it's just kind of surprising that they went with that approach when the overworld is so much better in my opinion. But also, to be fair, there's not much of an overworld. There are two zones that aren't the town, like the Highlands and the Rotten Vale or Spooky Woods, I forget what it's called. So as far as MMO aspects go, there's not a whole lot there. It's mostly just dungeon and boss instances anyway. And I like the boss fights, they're pretty good, and some of them are legitimately challenging, but I wish there was more good content besides just those. And it's not so bad to fight the same boss over and over again, especially when they're fun. That's the standard model for pretty much any MMO or RPG these days. But you do need to give players a carrot on a stick to chase, and unfortunately the only significant gains as far as I can see is just generic stat increases, which is where Wayfinder is kind of losing me. Now, that's not to say that there's nothing else to do or collect. There is plenty of cosmetic items to collect, mounts to obtain, apartments to stylize, quests to finish, characters to level, dyes and skins to hoard, all that good stuff. Since the MMO and live service aspect of the game is gone, and it just being pay to play, all that stuff can just be found, collected, and purchased with in-game currencies and stuff that you can just find. There's definitely a lot here for completionists and for those who, just like the overall presentation and gameplay. And again, I like the gameplay. It's just a little too repetitive for my taste. But there's still plenty of time to burn here in Wayfinder. I put 30 hours into the game at the time of recording this, but I'm sure I'd play more by the time the video goes live. The main quest line is long, it lasted pretty much that entire time, 30 hours. And it was way beyond me just getting max level on one of my characters. And there's tons of post-game content to dive into as well. So for a $25 game, it's not like there's a lack of content here. It's just a little repetitive in my taste. So let's talk about the story and the post-game content real fast. Now, I'm usually not too invested into stories. And I mean, that's the same here in Wayfinder. I'm not going to claim that it's super unique plot or anything like that. But it's not because I don't like writing or the characters and stuff, but it's just because I know there's something at stake, especially for an MMO story. I know the NPCs are all going to be there when things are said and done. I know my decisions, if there are any decisions, aren't going to matter. It's pretty just, straightforward. So the story isn't going to grip me. It's never really had a chance just with the way the games work basically these days. And that being said, I am glad they went through the effort to voice the entire main campaign questline. It's a lot easier to get you into the game and into the story when everyone's actually speaking and you're not sitting there reading text box over and over again. So if you're interested in a story, I'm sure there's something here, but for me, it's never going to be a thing. So I like the gameplay. I'm not too invested in the story, but it is there if you want it, and it is voiced. Speaking of gameplay, once you're actually done with the campaign, you do have post-game content to do. It's mostly consisting of finishing side quests, but you also get to do mythic hunts, which are bosses scaled up to max level, and then they'll require you to add in a lot of modifiers to make them harder than normal. And I like this sort of endgame. I like fighting bosses over and over again, especially when they're good, because it's basically Monster Hunter. But also, being able to add modifiers to adjust the difficulty to your liking is pretty cool. You have these imbuements, and you get up to 3 to put into every boss or dungeon, and so it's kind of like Chalice dungeons in Bloodborne, where you can get like Fetid, Rotted, Cursed. You can add all these weird imbuements that affect things and stuff differently depending on what order you put them in or what colors and stuff. Like, it's kind of neato. I like it, it's cool. I'm just a little bummed out with these mythic hunts and the rewards, because they basically offer you the same weapons that you've been getting through the entire game, but at a higher level than max, which is cool, but again, it's just numbers bloat. And it really doesn't do much for you if you're already killing these bosses with, you know, the standard level 30 weapons and stuff that you ended the game with. Like, what's the gain here? Like, why keep doing it? And that's another reason why I can see player retention isn't going to last too long. The carrot on a stick just isn't quite there in my opinion. But anyway, I've talked a lot already about it, so let me just summarize my experiences with Wayfinder. The game is fun, and it really opens up after you finish like the first act boss and step into the second overworld. Love it, it's great. It's got solid combat, and there's a lot of gameplay diversity if you want to experiment with different characters and weapons. I do have to say that there is no way Wayfinder would have gotten so much negative reception if it actually just launched in this state as it is right here as a single player co-op game with, you know, the extra content they added. It would have been an entirely different story. And honestly, I'm kind of glad it ended up the way it did. I know that kind of sucks to say, like, oh, your MMO failed, but I think it was for the better. And I think Wayfinder can definitely continue to develop and grow and be a much better game, kind of like Destiny. If you remember, Destiny Year 1 and all of Destiny 2 is just failures that need to be fixed, and it ends up being good. But to me, Wayfinder has that same potential as Destiny or Kingdoms of Amalur. I hope the time and effort is put into the game, and I hope it grows, because I do recommend it, even in its current state. There's plenty of worse games out there for like 25 bucks, and I do want to commend the developers for not giving up on their game and just canceling it because it kind of flopped at launch. So kudos to Airship Syndicate, and yeah, I do recommend Wayfinder. So that's going to be all for me. Thank you all for watching. Good luck out there, hunters. If anyone wants to talk shop about games or whatever, feel free to join my Discord in the description below. But yeah, peace and good luck out there.